Hi, it's Anna Mason here, and in this watercolour tip video I wanted to show you how I painted the textured sponge part of this yummy cupcake. The crumb-like texture is really detailed and can prove daunting when you're aiming for realism, especially when working with watercolour. How do you achieve all that texture without your paints mixing into one another, while still achieving a curved form to the sponge shape overall? Well, this is how I did it. I began by creating a drawing where I marked out the edge of the sponge and also the most prominent dark shapes within it. Next, I painted the lightest tones within the sponge, which are mostly at the sides where there's some reflection. I used a really pale yellow-brown mix, which I made even more yellow towards the edges. After that, I painted in the icing and the blueberry before I went on to paint the darkest tones within the sponge in little shapes under the icing and more towards the centre where the sponge is overall darker. I used a small brush and some thick dark brown paint. Because the pale layer underneath was dry, these little scribbly sorts of shapes I made stayed clearly defined. With the lightest and darkest tones painted, I could work on the midtones. To do this, I began with a watery and pale brown mix of paint. It was paler than I knew I'd need to get on those midtones, but working with it paler meant I could work in layers to darken and crucially to add texture to the sponge as I did so. So I applied the paint using little squiggling shapes with my brush and leaving plenty of gaps through to the paler layer underneath, especially at the sides of the cake where the sponge was in reflection. Next, I used another pale watery mix, this time with more yellow in it, to match to the hues I could see in the lighter parts of the sponge. The layer underneath was totally dry, so as I applied this paint as a light glaze over the centre, I didn't lose all the brush marks that I'd made before. And at the paler edges of the sponge, I left more gaps to the paler wash underneath and applied in squiggles again to add more texture. Once that layer was dry, I did the same again with an even smaller brush and even more yellow in the mix. And once this layer was dry, I applied another layer of the pale brown mid-tone mix, adding lots and lots of texture by applying using the little squiggly lines with my brush. And then finally, once that was dry, I could now tell that my darkest tones needed to be darkened some more, to be brought back into balance. So I remixed my thick dark brown mix and I used my smallest brush to darken those darkest tones and add even more squiggling detail, especially to the central area of the sponge, which needed to be darker overall. By working in this way, I balanced creating texture with getting the tonal balance right over the sponge as a whole, which meant that the sponge got a great 3D curved shape to it. I then went on to paint the paper case, shadow, and make a few more tonal adjustments across the whole painting to really finish off the delicious cupcake. I hope that's whet your appetite for painting a cake. A full step-by-step tutorial of this cupcake is available now in my online school. If you've enjoyed this tip video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'd love it if you'd share this video with your friends. And if you'd like to take one of my tried and tested step-by-step tutorials for free, hop on over to annamasonart.com, where you'll find even more resources to help you pick up your brush and paint the way you've always wanted to. Remember, you won't improve your painting unless you make the time to paint, so be sure to schedule in some me time this week and paint something you love. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with another tip for creating watercolours with wow.